Okay, we're back. We're live 1 o'clock. This is ThinkTech on a given Tuesday after Memorial Day, which is an important day. And we're talking on community matters here about racism in the military with our friend, 3-star General Dan Figleaf, retired. Welcome to the
Aloha.
show, Dan.
Aloha, Jay. Thanks. Always good to be here, and it's going to be nice to answer instead of ask questions.
You and I agreed that we'd cover the subject a few weeks ago, and I really appreciate your willingness to do that.
My pleasure.
I mean, you've had a major career, maybe I should say a general career in the military, the Air
I was
Force.
very lucky.
And but it's kind of remarkable. Not everybody gets to be a 3-star general and see as much as you've seen. And I recall that you took steps in the course of your career to deal with racism and bigotry in the service. And so you're, the perfect person to talk with because you were doing what you could, but in doing what you could, obviously you saw there was something you could do or should do. And I wonder if you can talk about the dynamic in a long career in the Air Force about, what you observed and what the direction was.
Well, I think the first observation that I'd make is that the United States military has, for several decades since the Integration Executive Order, been a standard setter in equal opportunity for our country. There's a lot good to say about equal opportunity in the military. But that doesn't mean racism is totally absent, and it doesn't mean we don't have a way to go. The Secretary of Defense is an African American. The Chief of Staff of the Air Force is an African American. Across the ranks of the senior levels, I think we've done very well. But I think that we have to do better across the board, and that it's an absolute security imperative that our country properly represent, or our military properly represent the demographics of the country and give each of the elements of our demographics the opportunity to contribute to our defense.
I'm reminded of, Vietnam, where there were some troops who were shooting their officers. They were ticked off about something. I suspect it was a combination of things, not only racism, but racism had to be involved in that because that was a sort of an integrated force in Vietnam. And you can't. The cohesion comes to mind, and that word has been used so often that you must have cohesion among the troops if you are to have an effective military. Once you have people spending time hating each other, it doesn't work well, and you really can't have an effective military. Am I right? Have you seen that?
Well, I think cohesion is the key, and to have a cohesive unit in peace or war, everybody has to be part of the team, the solution, the mission, and they have to have a sense that their contribution has value. And without going into great detail on the fraggings, as they were called in Vietnam, I suspect that was much more a matter of competence than race, because you, most of your ancillary opinions go away when you're getting shot at. That's my experience anyway. And but still, if you want a cohesive team at the tactical unit level, squad, a flight, a fighter squadron, aboard a ship, you can't have outliers. It's far more important, in my experience as a leader, to make sure everybody's involved and to make sure that your top performers feel good about their day, if you will.
Back in the early 70s, to my personal chagrin, the draft was terminated after Vietnam. And I always questioned that because I saw the greatest generation as a sort of a mixed bag military with a lot of reservists in it, a lot of people plucked out of the civilian world who were not career military and who were not invested in a career perhaps in the same way that a volunteer would be invested. So I always thought that was like not a good maneuver to terminate the draft. Do you think that the all volunteer nature of the service now somehow relates to the existence of racism and bigotry in the service?
You won't find this answer very equivocal. Absolutely not. I mean, racism is part of humanity. sadly. I mean, I wish it wasn't. But so no, I don't think there's any cause and effect relationship in the termination of the draft. I do think there is a great value in citizen soldiers to cover soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and coasties in one fell swoop. And you don't have to go back to World War II. You have to go back to one of the greatest exemplars, Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, the Maine college professor who was a key leader at the Battle of Gettysburg. And look at the value of having somebody drawn from society called to defend it. And he was a college professor, but if he'd been a blacksmith, there would have been value there too. And I remember my parents, after World War II, my dad served here on Ford Island just after the end of the war in the Navy, talking about all of the women walking their babies in carriages in Wisconsin without a husband because the husband had been killed in combat.
Yeah.
To be secure, we have to be invested broadly in our security across all lines: economic, racial, geographic. And I do think we've lost that. I don't think we can back up to a draft. I think that's we're not going to get there.
We're not going to get there.
We have to find other ways.
Yeah.
To get the entire nation invested in security personally.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I heard on the radio more than once in the past few weeks this notion, and I've heard it in many places, and I'm not sure how I feel about it, but the seniors, including military and civilian seniors, saying that the United States has the best military force in the world. A lot of people say that. It's a trope almost. And you wonder if the military is an accurate reflection of the country in general, and the country in general is divided and divisive. The country in general has demonstrations of bigotry and racism on a regular basis, as opposed to other countries, which, they have, as you say, it's a human condition, but maybe not so much in other countries. So if there is divisiveness in the country, and if that is translated into divisiveness in the military, can we have the best military in the world?
There are about 23 questions in that question. So let me first say that, I think we do have the best military for a variety of reasons, not in a we're Supermen and women and everybody else isn't, but we have the benefit of a very diverse country with extraordinary resources that's got a military that swears to protect and defend a constitution, not some territory, not some president or king or whatever. And we set out to do good. Don't always achieve that, but we set out to do good. So I agree. We are as capable and certainly as committed. And I've worked with many fine militaries around the world. But the divisiveness is not unique to the United States. I've only been to, I think, 72 countries, so I don't have a complete sample size. But
there are only 92 in total, actually.
Yeah. So, there's divisiveness everywhere, and where that divisiveness is suppressed is a far more toxic environment. And the fact that we have this angst and this national self-examination of the past year or so is difficult, but it's not bad. We ought to be compelled to do better.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like that some of the violent events that have led to it hadn't happened, but we ought to be compelled to do better. I do think that for military leaders of the day, it's more difficult for them than when I served. And it's hard to believe, but I retired from the Air Force 13 years ago. Wow. And so I think they've got a pretty complicated problem set or challenge.
Why do you say it's more complicated than before?
Because it's more visible. When I came into the military, it was pretty simple. There had been challenges, as you said, in Vietnam, and there certainly were the turbulence of the 60s, and so it wasn't easy. But within the military, it was pretty simple: do your job, shut up, and you'll do okay. And by the way, you don't get to be racist. we're graded on that, as I said on my Figments show. There was a block on our officer performance report that said that addressed our commitment to equal opportunity. So it wasn't allowed, and it was simple. It wasn't visible. It wasn't. Race was a topic, but it wasn't the preeminent topic that it is now in the U.S. And there wasn't there wasn't as much concern about all the elements of racial turmoil that there is now. It's not a simple time.
When I was in the service was during Vietnam, and we had direct commissions to African American officers who were brought in order to even the playing field, I guess, and improve the numbers, if you will. And I recall that the people in the Coast Guard, the existing cadre, were completely okay with that. They could have resisted. They could have said, "Oh, these guys are getting in cheap. They don't have to prove themselves. They're just being, commissioned on a political basis." But the fact is, the Coast Guard didn't see it that way. Nobody I knew resisted that. So, as you said, and I agree with it, you were told you couldn't be racist. You had to accept the policy, and people did. It was simple. It was not complicated. It gets complicated now. But let me ask you this. This dwells on me. People always say that the military is a reflection of the country, and that's good. It should be a reflection of the country. But really, should it be? Because in the country, we have a problem enforcing anti-racism norms and laws, or adopting new ones, it seems like. But in the military, the commander is all powerful. You have the Code of Military Justice. You have that fitness report form that the commander fills out. And if you say, as a matter of policy in the military, we will not have racism here, there's no place better equipped to enforce that. You want to be a racist, you're not going to get promoted. And if you go overt on it, you're going to get prosecuted. And it's that easy.
Yeah.
So clearly, why can't the military just stamp it out?
Jay, first of all, commanders are not all powerful. Trust me, I think I was a commander 7 times or something like that. So, and we're not all powerful because you can't beat your people into submission, not that you'd want to. And you have many rules and laws that govern your behavior as a commander. So there are clearly defined.
Surely none of them would permit racism.
No,
so if I say,
but that doesn't. They also don't enable thought control. So I can't walk into a room as a commander and say you will not have racist thoughts, and assume that we're going to stamp out racism. It's the manifestation of racism that you can control if you know it's there, and we are a reflection of society. We should represent the society that we defend. And I think we're one of the best representations of our society, but we're not perfect. And we ought not expect that we're perfect. So a commander's job is to enforce the rules that say, that prohibit not racism, because you can't, because that's a mindset, right? That's an intellectual sort of emotional thing that you can, as much as possible, prevent the manifestations of racism that affect people's treatment or opportunity.
Well, you keep on seeing these articles, including a lot of anecdotal stories about Black people who do suffer in the military. And I mean, just all you got to do is Google it. You'll find a dozen stories in 5 minutes about this happening, and that's manifestation. And I'm thinking that if you made a policy, maybe it's not clear. Maybe General Austin or the Secretary of Defense Austin, ought to say, "Look, I really mean it. I don't want you to do this." And the president could say that too. "I don't want you to do this. And if you do this, we are going to take action." And if you say that and you make that a clearly enunciated policy, it seems to me that it will slow down. It will not happen. And you may find people who are in their heart racist, but you won't find the manifestations.
Yeah, and I think by and large we do that. And if I were to do anything that I didn't do as a commander, because it didn't come to mind, I would have a reading in my unit of the executive order of July 26th, 1948, and because it's so clear, and it includes an element that isn't oft mentioned. We talk about equal opportunity, but it's really President Truman's order that mandates equal treatment and opportunity across the armed forces. You don't need anything else, and it's an executive order. So have a nice day. And we have rules and laws within the military, inside the Uniform Court of Military Justice, that give you the power. You have to know it's there. So I'll give you an example of extremism that illuminates. So suppose you had a corporal in a National Guard unit who wrote that I think all men are fine as long as they're not a N-word or a Chinaman. And I think that all white folks should be in Europe and America, and yellow folks in Asia, and black folks in Africa. And that's how I feel. Commander could do something about that. But do you know who wrote that? The same man who signed the executive order mandating integration in the armed forces, Harry S. Truman. Now, he signed it. I got to do math here, 37 years before he signed the executive order. And his experiences in life changed his views to some degree, but he grew up in a very racist environment. And you can't weed that out, but there's plenty of guidance that allows you to stop the performance. What I'm thinking about now, Jay, and I shouldn't run on too much because you're the host, but we have those rules. I think it's the more subtle things at the lower levels that we have to address, because the military is all about conformity. You conform to standards, you execute the mission, and you shut up. I think I just summed up military service.
Well, let me make myself.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I'll make myself
Go
a
ahead.
lieutenant in the Navy. Okay, middle management. And I'm a recent graduate, for example, of the Naval Academy. And the Naval Academies have had examples of racism and
Of course they have.
sexual harassment too. But I see happening in my unit, the people under me. I see what a bad smell. I see racism there. I feel it. I hear about it. People tell me about it, and so forth. And I want to stamp it out. So my inclination would be to put that individual or those individuals on report, or stop their promotions in some way. If it was manifest or troublesome, visibly to the unit, I would put them on report and have a captain's mast or a court martial over it. And I would be tough. I would be tough, and I would say it's my personal feeling and obligation and power to stop this. And it may affect my career. It may affect what my seniors think of me, but I am going to do it because it's more important than anything else. So query, why can't I do that?
You can. You absolutely can. As you know from one of my Figments episodes, I addressed every unit that I took command of with a speech that included equal opportunity as my personal core value, because it was. Yeah. And I don't need a regulation, a rule, or whatever. It's my core value. So if you want to succeed here, contribute to an equal opportunity environment. But
yeah, let's talk about that.
In one case, let me share an anecdote, because you're right. You can be tough in it. As a second in command in a fighter squadron, I had a guy who was easily one of the very best fighter pilots in the unit, but he had an equal opportunity issue. The details don't matter, but he was just, you could tell he had his views that were not equal opportunity compliant, and they manifested himself in how he treated certain folks, women in this case, in the squadron. And so that's pretty easy. I took him aside and said, X, you're one of my best fighter pilots. You're on the fast track. You're going to do well. But you've got a problem. You either fix that problem or you will never fly again. You will not succeed in the Air Force. And you don't want to fight me on this because I have all the tools. So I'm watching you. And one misstep and you're done. It was that simple. And I knew what he valued. He valued his reputation and progress as a fighter pilot. And said, you want to throw that away by being a non-compliant? That's not the word I used. Fine. Could he have filed a complaint? Sure. But with what basis?
What for? What for?
Yeah.
What could he complain about?
Well, people often complain without a basis. So I interrupted you, Jay. Go ahead.
Well, I was on the same path as your answer. If I'm a junior officer, or for that matter, a senior officer, and I see things, I see an environment even, maybe it's hard to define exactly what would trouble me, but something that would trouble me, and I wanted to take action about it. I think a lot of officers in the military do not take action. Maybe in the name of their careers, maybe in the name of not making waves, and that's a, what I want to call it, a cultural point. If every officer in every service said, "I am simply not going to permit this, and I'm going to use those instrumentalities that you talked about a minute ago to make sure it doesn't happen on my watch," this would be over. Because in the end, it's a social work question. It's also a military question. Why can I not be a racist? Because I'm telling you, you cannot be a racist. I am ordering you not to be a racist.
Yeah, but it's not that simple, because it's not, you can't will somebody's views out of their head. As I said, you don't have the power of mind control. So, and the population of the military is continually refreshed from what? Society. So your work is never done there. And I think I believe that you're overstating that many commanders and leaders don't do it. I think by and large, the military does pretty well on the overt, obvious, easily defined and easily witnessed behaviors that are contrary to our policy of equal treatment and opportunity. What I don't think we've done, and what I think the events of the last year have illustrated more clearly, is get down into the next level of subtle, systemic manifestations of racism in promotion and performance standards that aren't intended to be racist, but since we're built on conformity, tend to favor the natural conformity of people who come from a certain background, white males. Okay? And doesn't have to be intentional to exist. So if I were a commander today, first of all, I'd be really old for a commander, but I would be thinking a lot about mission-based conformity. Are the things that I'm asking people to conform to, the standards of conduct, appearance, performance, are they related to the mission? Or have I got perhaps a cultural bias that I don't even recognize that makes me look askance at somebody who comes from an inner city African American background? I don't know. Probably. And it's that
I think there's a lot of
level
people
that creates real change.
I think there's a lot of people in the country and in the service, who may have that kind of implicit bias. But we're not talking about implicit bias here, because that, as you said, it's very hard to identify and stop that. But what is easier is the manifestation, and that's important. Now, what the other thing I wanted to talk to you about, a couple of other things to talk to you about, and that is the extremists in the military. There have been a number of articles about retired military veterans who, claim to be patriotic, but who supported, and a number of them were there in the Capitol on January 6th. Now, what does this tell us about the military, about veterans, and about the insurrection crowd? So it's a great concern that somebody, even one person, could be in the military, could have invested his career in the military, put his life on the line in many cases, and be there in an attempt to attack our democracy and our government and our way of political life. I find that extraordinary, and I wonder how that could ever happen, especially with a veteran who spent his lifetime in service of these United States.
Yeah, I can't speak to their motivations because I haven't spoken to them, and the entire incident is as disturbing as you described. But uh, you'd have to. I think that's worth digging more deeply with them. And what is it? What is it that they felt and allowed them, enabled, permitted their participation in that kind of event? Because it's an outlier, and you look at the numbers; it's a real outlier. But again, I go back to the fact that we begin in basic training as a raw cut reflection of society, and we only become slightly less raw over time, but maybe a lot less raw. But there are still elements on all sides, not just that particular issue, that hang on to their views. I'm just as disturbed by military members who get out and commit other crimes, because that's not how they were taught in the military. And there are some that take that have committed really horrible crimes, and crimes of violence, but also crimes of drug smuggling and extortion, and so we can wish for perfection. We're not going to get there. There are deeper issues in our society where we, and I think it's true on all sides, feel like we have to take an extreme approach to expressing our views on all sides. And that troubles me most of anything. Because
it troubles me that there were active duty. There are active duty policemen too.
But we have ways to deal with that. So I regret it. I suspect that when Colonel X finds out that Major Y was involved, if they're surprised, first of all, they're not a good commander. And secondly, if they're not surprised, they're not a good commander. Because they didn't know their people and they weren't dealing with it.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
That's what we pay them for.
So and then you imply that it's a matter of education. So a lot of the enlisted education is boot camp sort of thing, and in boot camp we know from at least these articles that there's a fair amount of open racism in boot camp. And query, can't we use boot camp as a way to train them when they're young and impressionable, not to engage in racism while they're in the service?
I'm sure we do. I am certain that there's some of that in racism, but you don't learn it or in boot camp, in basic training. But you don't learn that from books. You learn it from life. And when we look at military kids like my kids and look at the vast majority of young military people, they're far more comfortable in a multi-ethnic environment than their friends from wherever they are back home, because they're exposed to it and they rely on it. The kid who goes through basic training, they have a lot of team events in basic training. It's not all individual. And whether you think badly of the color of somebody's skin or not, you need their help, man. And when you need their help and they deliver, that does change you far more than a lecture or a book.
Oh, it should, for sure.
It generally does.
One last point that we should cover is the the sexual abuse, harassment, and for that matter, sexual crimes in the military. So there is an initiative being advanced in Congress to make a separate convening authority, a lawyer who has the power to act as convening authority to determine whether a court martial should take place.
Mm-hmm.
This is all intended to avoid the situation where the complaining person has had not had success in raising her complaint or his complaint within the chain of command. And there are all too many cases where it never goes anywhere, and that appears in all these anecdotal articles as well. So I doubt that it's going to pass simply because Congress, especially the Senate, isn't going to do anything about anything. But there are even some Republican senators who want to advance this, and I'd like to know your experience with the issue and what your thought about whether this would help in terms of dealing with reducing the amount of sexual harassment in a military that has both men and women, and other characterizations too. Where are we going with that? Should that happen? Would that help?
Well, first of all, I'd say you put a lot of generalities towards military that never happens in the civilian world. Come on, Jay.
Sure it does. Sure it does.
Okay, so
we have a separate
so let's
system
be
of
balanced
justice.
about that. And
But
that
we have a separate system of justice, right?
I suspect has as many or more flaws. In fact, I'm quite certain of it. But I'm not allergic, if you will, to rethinking the authority for the investigation and prosecution of sexual crimes in the military, because the one that we have isn't working perfectly. The next one might not either, but a rethinking of it and being open to what works best to protect the men and women who choose to serve our country at the risk of being remembered on Memorial Day. They deserve the best we can do. So if that's a way to do the best we can do, I'm all for it.
I was going to ask you for a closing comment. I think you just gave me one.
Okay. And that's key, Jay. We, the young men and old men, and young women and old women in our military, make the promise to, if necessary, commit the ultimate sacrifice. We absolutely owe them the best we can do in terms of equal treatment and opportunity.
We want to offer them everything, and certainly we want to offer them a quality of social life, a quality of racial life, if you will.
Yep.
So is this doable?
No, of course not, because you're talking about the ideal. Can we make progress, and should we strive to make progress? Yes. So no, I don't believe we're ever going to get to perfection, but that should not inspire us to do nothing. It should inspire us to do more and try to get closer to perfection. Vince Lombardi once said, my favorite coach and a great exemplar of equal opportunity, we pursue perfection knowing that it's impossible so that we can get to excellence.
Dan Figleaf, General
Thanks,
Dan
Jay.
Figleaf, 3 stars in the Air Force, a long career. Thank you so much for this discussion.
My pleasure, Jay. Aloha.
Aloha.